Apache chief sold his cursed daughter to a sheriff. What he did next shocked everyone. The sun was beginning to set over the Apache village, casting a warm golden glow across the land. The village was peaceful, yet there was an air of unease that had settled in the hearts of its people. The Apache chief, known for his wisdom and strength, paced back and forth near his hut, his thoughts heavy.
His name was Tala, and for many years his people had trusted him to lead with fairness and honor.
But lately, Tala had been faced with a decision that weighed on him more than any battle he had ever fought. His daughter Ayana was the source of his troubled heart. She was a beautiful young woman, with dark hair that flowed like the river, and eyes as deep as the night sky. From the moment she was born, there were whispers in the village about the curse she carried. The elders spoke in hushed tones, warning that she was marked by something beyond the natural world. Some claimed it was a curse. Others said it was a gift, but no one could explain the strange events that followed Ayana wherever she went. As Ayana grew older, the whispers turned into fearful rumors. She was different, they said. Things happened around her, things no one could explain. Animals would grow agitated when she was near, and fires would suddenly ignite without reason. People who got too close to her often found themselves suffering from strange illnesses or bad luck. It was as if the world itself recoiled from her presence. Ayana was aware of these rumors. She could feel the tension when she walked through the village. People would glance at her with fear in their eyes, quickly turning away. She had never asked for this. All she wanted was to live a peaceful life, but the curse, or whatever it was, seemed to follow her like a shadow. She tried to avoid the villagers, but no matter how far she went, the strange occurrences never stopped. Tala loved his daughter more than anything in the world. He had always been protective of her, even when others began to avoid her. He knew the rumors were only making her more isolated, but there was little he could do. He had sought the help of the village healers and wise women, but nothing seemed to work. No matter how hard he tried, the curse lingered, and the village's fear grew. One day, a stranger arrived in the village. He was a man dressed in the uniform of a sheriff, with a stern face and a hardened look in his eyes. He had heard the stories of Ayana's curse and traveled to the village to see for himself. He approached Tala with an offer that left the chief speechless. "I can help your daughter," the sheriff said, his voice steady but filled with a strange certainty. "I've seen cases like hers before. I can take her far away from here, away from the superstition and fear. In my town, she'll be safe. I'll give her a new life, one where she won't be judged by things beyond her control." Tala was skeptical at first. He had heard many stories of outsiders who promised to help only to leave destruction in their wake. But the sheriff's confidence was unlike any he had ever seen. The sheriff spoke with such conviction that Tala began to wonder if he might be the answer his daughter needed. The chief was torn. He couldn't bear to let his daughter go, but the fear of the curse spreading further, of Ayana being rejected by the entire tribe, weighed heavily on him. After much thought, Tala made the difficult decision. He agreed to the sheriff's offer. It wasn't an easy choice for him. His love for his daughter was boundless, but he knew that her presence in the village was causing harm. The people's fear was growing, and with that fear came distrust. The village was starting to turn its back on Ayana, and Tala knew that if things continued this way, his daughter's life would be nothing but suffering. When Ayana heard of her father's decision, her heart sank. She had always known there was something different about her, but she never imagined her father would send her away. The sheriff had spoken to her with kindness, but she could see the calculating look in his eyes. She had heard stories of people being used and sold for less noble reasons. The idea of leaving her home, her family, and everything she had ever known was terrifying. But Tala explained to her that this was for the best. He spoke of the possibility of a new life, one where Ayana could live without fear or rejection. She would be far from the judgment of the village, and perhaps the curse would no longer follow her. The sheriff promised that she would be treated well, that she would be given a safe place where she could heal and be free of the strange occurrences that had marked her life. With a heavy heart, Ayana agreed. She trusted her father's judgment even though it felt like she was being abandoned. The sheriff was a stranger, and the idea of leaving the only home she had ever known filled her with dread. But Ayanna had no choice. She knew that her father had done what he thought was best for her. She would go with the sheriff and perhaps find a way to stop the curse once and for all. The day Ayanna left was one of the hardest days of Tala's life. As she rode away with the sheriff, he stood at the edge of the village watching his daughter disappear into the distance. He knew he had made the right choice, but it didn't make the pain any less. He loved Ayanna deeply, and sending her away felt like a betrayal even though he knew it was for her own good. Tala prayed that the sheriff would keep his promise, that Ayanna would find peace, and that the curse would finally be broken. Ayanna, on the other hand, felt a deep sense of loss. She had always wondered what it would be like to live without the burden of the curse, but now that she was leaving, she wasn't sure she would ever find happiness again. The world outside her village was unknown, filled with uncertainties. The sheriff's town, with its strange, unfamiliar faces, seemed like an endless sea of unfamiliarity. The journey ahead was long, and as Ayanna sat beside the sheriff, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. She hoped that in the sheriff's town she could finally be free of the curse, but deep down she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There was still much she didn't understand, and the questions of whether she would ever truly be free lingered in her mind. The journey to the sheriff's town was long and tiresome. Ayanna sat in silence beside the sheriff as their horses trotted along the dusty path, the landscape shifting from the familiar desert terrain of her village to the unknown wilderness beyond. The air was dry and the sun beat down harshly, casting a haze over the land. Ayanna's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and uncertainty. She couldn't help but glance back at the village with each passing mile, her heart aching with every step further away from her home. The sheriff, a man with a stern demeanor, didn't speak much during the ride. He had said little more than the necessary directions and commands for their horses, leaving Ayanna to her thoughts. His silence made her feel even more isolated. She had heard stories of sheriffs, men of power and authority, respected and feared. She had never imagined that one would play such a role in her life. Though he had promised her safety, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his offer than he was letting on. As the day wore on, they reached the sheriff's town. It was small, but the wooden buildings and bustling streets gave it a sense of life that Ayanna hadn't expected. The people seemed busy, walking briskly from one place to another, paying no mind to the newcomer riding in with the sheriff. The townsfolk barely glanced at her, and Ayanna wondered if they had heard of her arrival and feared her like the people of her village had. The sheriff led her to a modest house at the edge of the town. It was a quiet place, far enough from the center to offer some privacy, yet close enough to remain within reach of the sheriff's duties. The house itself was simple but comfortable, with a small porch and a few potted plants lining the entrance. It looked warm and welcoming, but Ayanna felt no comfort in it. The walls seemed to close in around her as she dismounted and entered the house. Inside, the sheriff directed her to a small room with a bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that overlooked the town. Ayanna sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the silence pressing down on her. She glanced out the window, staring at the unfamiliar surroundings, and couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loneliness.
This was not her home. This was not where she belonged.
The sheriff's voice broke through her thoughts, calling her attention. He told her that he would be busy with his work, but he would return later in the day to check on her.
"You'll be safe here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I know this is a lot to adjust to, but you'll find peace here. Take your time to settle in. If you need anything, just let me know."
His words were meant to reassure her, but they did little to ease her mind. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, trapped in a place she didn't understand. Her heart ached for the familiar faces of her people, her family, and the safety of her old life.
Even though her life in the village had been filled with whispers and fear, it had still been her home.
As the sheriff left, Ayanna found herself alone in the quiet house. She wandered around the small room, touching the furnishings, but finding little comfort in them. Her thoughts kept returning to the village, to the people who had once called her family. Had they truly abandoned her? Was she truly cursed, as they had claimed?
Or had she simply been misunderstood all her life? The curse.
Ayanna still didn't fully understand it. She had never asked for the strange occurrences that followed her.
Animals acting strange, fires starting without cause, objects moving on their own. These things had become a part of her life, but she had never caused them intentionally. As a child, she had feared her own powers, unsure whether they were a gift or a punishment.
The village had feared her, and that fear had turned into isolation. Her father, Tala, had always tried to protect her, but even he had felt helpless against the power she carried. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound coming from the street outside. Curious, Ayana approached the window and peered out. People were going about their business, but there was something different about them. They didn't look at her the way the villagers had.
They didn't avoid her, nor did they stare in fear. It was as though she was invisible to them, a ghost passing through their lives without leaving a mark.
The sheriff's town was different. She wasn't sure if it was better or worse, but it was certainly unfamiliar. She had been hoping for a sense of belonging, but instead, she felt more like a stranger in a strange land. Days passed slowly in the sheriff's town. Ayana spent much of her time in her room, unsure of what to do with herself. She would sometimes wander the small house or sit by the window, gazing at the world outside, but the unease never left her.
She had hoped that being away from the village would help her find peace, but all she found was emptiness. During this time, Ayana began to notice strange things happening around her again.
At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her, but the longer she stayed, the more she realized that something was indeed happening. The house would sometimes grow unnaturally cold, even though the weather outside was warm. She would hear faint whispers when no one else was around, and sometimes the objects in her room would move on their own, as if they were responding to her thoughts. The sheriff, it seemed, had been right about one thing. There was something beyond her control, something powerful that followed her wherever she went. But this time, it was different. The power felt more controlled, less chaotic than it had in the village. Perhaps being in the sheriff's town, away from the superstition and fear, was starting to have an effect on her. Or perhaps, Ayana thought, the sheriff's presence was calming her. Though he was a man of few words, his steadiness had a strange effect on her. One evening, after another long and lonely day, Ayana sat by the window once more. The sun was setting, and the town was quiet. It was during this moment of stillness that Ayana heard footsteps outside her door. The sheriff had returned. He knocked before entering, and when he stepped inside, Ayana looked up at him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty.
"I see you've been settling in,"
he said, offering a small smile. "How are you feeling?" Ayana hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer.
"I'm getting used to it," she said quietly. "But it's hard. I miss my people."
The sheriff nodded. "I understand.
It's never easy being away from home, but you'll find your place here, I'm sure of it.
And if you ever need anything, I'm here to help." His words, though comforting, didn't ease the heavy feeling in her chest. Ayana couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. She didn't know if it was the strange occurrences in the house, the sense of isolation, or the quiet that surrounded her, but she knew she had yet to find the peace the sheriff had promised her. As the days turned into weeks, Ayana began to question everything, her curse, her journey, and even the sheriff's true intentions. The more she observed, the more she realized that the sheriff wasn't telling her everything. There was something he was keeping from her, something that would change everything. The days seemed to stretch on forever for Ayana in the sheriff's town. Each day she found herself wrestling with the same feelings of isolation and uncertainty. The sheriff's house had become both a refuge and a prison for her. The once promising life away from the village now felt suffocating, as if the walls of the house were closing in on her with every passing hour. Ayana had spent most of her days in her room, sitting by the window and staring out at the unfamiliar streets. She was still unsure of what to make of the town or its people. The sheriff had been kind, at least in his own way, but he was also distant and reserved. He did not offer much in terms of conversation, and though he checked in on her every day, it was as if there was an unspoken barrier between them. He was kind but cold, protective yet unapproachable. There was a strange unease in the air whenever he was near, and Ayana couldn't help but wonder if he was hiding something from her. Over time, Ayana began to notice that the strange occurrences in the house seemed to be growing more frequent. The cold spots, the shifting of objects, and the whispers that she could never quite understand. These things had been happening with increasing regularity. But there was something different now.
The power that had once felt chaotic, like a wild storm that she could neither understand nor control, now seemed to be tied to something deeper.
It wasn't just random. It felt deliberate, as though the very house, the town itself, was responding to her in ways she couldn't explain. The sheriff, for his part, had taken notice of these changes. At first, he had brushed them off as nothing more than the product of Ayana's imagination, or perhaps just the strange quirks of an old house. But as time passed, he began to see the same things Ayana had seen. The objects moving on their own, the sudden cold drafts, the way the air seemed to thrum with energy. The sheriff was no fool, and though he was used to the natural world's mysteries, even he couldn't deny that there was something unnatural at work. One evening, after another long day of silence and solitude, Ayana was sitting in her usual spot by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the stillness that seemed to hang over the town. But tonight, there was something different in the air. The wind had picked up, and the trees outside swayed with an eerie rhythm, as if they were dancing to a tune that only they could hear. Ayana felt a strange shiver run down her spine. There was something more to this town, to her presence here, than she had realized. The sheriff had been acting strangely as well. He had begun spending more time in the town, leaving her alone in the house for longer stretches of time. When he did return, he was often distant, his mind clearly preoccupied with something. There was a tension between them now, a quiet unease that neither of them spoke of, but both could feel. Ayana wondered if the sheriff had begun to question his decision to bring her here, if he had begun to fear the power that seemed to swirl around her. It was on one of these evenings that Ayana decided to confront the sheriff. She couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. She needed answers. She had to know why he had brought her here, why he had promised to keep her safe, only to leave her alone in a town full of strangers. She needed to understand the strange force that was growing stronger inside her, the power that seemed to respond to her emotions, her thoughts. And she needed to know if the sheriff had any idea what was really going on. When the sheriff returned that night, Ayana was waiting for him in the living room. She could see the tension in his face as soon as he walked in. He looked tired, worn from the long day, but there was something else in his eyes, something more guarded than before. It was as though he was preparing for a confrontation, as if he knew what was coming. "I need to talk to you," Ayana said, her voice steady but firm.
"Why did you bring me here? What is happening to me?"
"To this place?" The sheriff hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door as though considering leaving. But then he sighed and walked over to the chair across from her. He sat down slowly, as if the weight of his decision was finally beginning to bear down on him. "You're not like other people, Ayana," he said quietly, his voice tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "When I first heard of you, I thought it was all just superstition. The curse, the strange happenings. I thought it was all just stories. But the longer you've been here, the more I've come to realize that there's something different about you. And this town, well, it's not what it seems either." Ayana's heart skipped a beat. She had known for a while that there was something strange about this town, but hearing the sheriff admit it out loud made everything feel more real, more dangerous.
"What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
"What's really going on here?" The sheriff leaned forward, his eyes darkening. "There's a history to this place," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "A history that's been buried for a long time. People like you, people with powers, with curses, have been drawn to this town for centuries. It's no accident that you're here. You were brought here for a reason." Ayana felt her pulse quicken. "What are you saying? That my being here is part of some plan?"
"It's not just you, Ayana. It's everything."
"This town, this house, it's all connected." There's something ancient about this place, something that was here long before either of us. And you, your power, it's part of it. The curse, the strange occurrences, it's all part of a greater force that's been waiting for someone like you to arrive.
Ayana's mind was racing. She had always known that there was something beyond her understanding when it came to her powers, but this was more than she had ever imagined. This was bigger than her. This was something tied to the very land beneath her feet, to the history of the town itself. "I don't understand," Ayana whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The sheriff looked at her with a mixture of regret and something darker, something Ayana couldn't quite place.
I didn't bring you here to control you, Ayana. I brought you here because I thought I could help. But now I see that I don't have the answers. I'm just as much a part of this as you are. And I'm starting to think that maybe we're both in over our heads.
Ayana sat back, her mind spinning with the sheriff's words.
There were so many things she didn't understand, so many questions left unanswered. But one thing was clear. She was not alone in this.
The sheriff, for all his distance, was caught up in the same web of mystery and power that she was. And if she was going to survive whatever was coming, she would need to understand this town, her powers, and the forces that had drawn her here. As the sheriff stood to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her with an unreadable expression. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said, "and we'll figure this out together." Ayana nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. But one thing was certain. The sheriff's town was no longer a refuge.
It was a place full of secrets, and Ayana was determined to uncover them all. The days following the sheriff's revelation weighed heavily on Ayana's mind. The uncertainty that had once lingered in the background was now a pressing force that consumed her thoughts. The sheriff's words haunted her, twisting her understanding of everything she thought she knew about herself, her powers, and the town that had become her unexpected refuge. What did he mean when he said that she had been brought here for a reason? Why did this town seem so connected to her, and what was the force that had been waiting for someone like her? Ayana couldn't shake the feeling that the town and its strange happenings were not just the result of a curse, but part of something much larger, something ancient and far beyond her comprehension. She had spent the last few weeks struggling to control the strange power within her, but now the sheriff's words made her question everything. Was she merely a pawn in something bigger? Were the strange occurrences that followed her truly the result of her own actions, or was something manipulating her in ways she didn't understand? The sheriff had promised to return the next day to help her find answers, but the hours that passed before his return felt like an eternity. Each creak of the house, each gust of wind that rattled the windows made her feel as if the walls were closing in on her. She spent her days pacing the small room, waiting for the sheriff's return. Her emotions were a storm. Fear, confusion, and curiosity all churned within her, mixing into a turmoil she could not escape. When the sheriff finally returned, Ayana was ready. She stood by the window, watching as he approached the house. His footsteps were heavy, each one a reminder of the responsibility he carried, the burden of the secrets he had yet to reveal. As he entered the house, Ayana didn't wait for him to speak first. She needed answers, and she was no longer willing to wait. "I need to know everything," Ayana said, her voice firm and steady. "What did you mean when you said that I was brought here for a reason? What is this place? What am I really doing here?" The sheriff closed the door behind him, his face shadowed with a mix of guilt and resignation. He took a deep breath before answering. "I know this is hard to believe, but you're not the only one who's been affected by what's happening here. This town, this house, it's part of something much older. There's a history to it, one that goes back hundreds of years." She had always felt that there was more to this place than met the eye, but hearing the sheriff speak about it so openly made her realize how deep the mystery ran. "This town was founded long ago, and with it came a curse," the sheriff continued, his voice low and careful. "Not a curse like the one you've been told about, but a power. An ancient force that was sealed away here. Over the years, people with abilities like yours have been drawn to this place whether they know it or not. You're not the first, and you won't be the last."
"So, I'm not cursed?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly.
"It's not my fault?"
The sheriff looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and regret.
"No, Ayanna. What's happening to you isn't your fault. You were chosen not by anyone, but by this place, this force. The power that's been dormant for so long has been waiting for someone to awaken it. And it seems that person is you."
Ayanna felt as though the ground beneath her feet was shifting.
She had always believed that her powers were a curse, that they were something to be feared, something that separated her from everyone else. But now, the sheriff was telling her that her abilities were not a burden, but part of something far larger and more mysterious than she could have imagined.
"So, what does this mean for me?" she asked. "What am I supposed to do with this power? And what happens if I can't control it?"
The sheriff ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled.
"That's the part I don't have all the answers to. The power within you is strong, and it's been growing ever since you arrived. The more you resist it, the more it will try to take control. But if you embrace it, if you learn to understand it, you might be able to use it. You could change everything, Ayanna. You could be the key to unlocking what this town has been hiding for so long." Ayanna felt a wave of emotion rush through her. Fear, confusion, and a strange sense of hope.
She had spent her life trying to control her powers, trying to suppress them to avoid causing harm. But the sheriff was telling her that resisting them might only make things worse. She needed to learn how to control the power, to understand it. "But how do I do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
"I don't even know where to start."
The sheriff met her gaze, his expression serious.
"We need to find the source of the power. It's here, somewhere in this town. There are ancient texts, artifacts, things that have been hidden away for years. We need to find them before the power consumes you, before it takes control." Ayanna
Nodded, her mind racing with the possibilities. The idea of controlling the power that had once felt like a curse was both thrilling and terrifying. She had always feared what her abilities might do if they were left unchecked, but now she was beginning to see them as something that could be harnessed, something that could help her unlock the secrets of the town. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady with determination.
The sheriff stood up, his expression resolute. "We begin searching, together. We'll find the answers, and we'll do it before it's too late."
With that, they set out, Ayanna following the sheriff as he led her through the town. The streets, once quiet and empty, now felt like a labyrinth, each corner holding secrets waiting to be uncovered. They walked past old buildings, their wooden frames creaking in the wind, and down alleyways that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The town had a strange, haunting beauty to it, as if the past and the present were intertwined, each moment held in place by the power that lingered beneath the surface. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the town, Ayanna felt the pull of the power growing stronger. It was like a hum in the air, a quiet vibration that seemed to match the beating of her own heart. She could feel it calling to her, urging her to listen, to understand. The sheriff noticed the change in her and paused, glancing over at her with concern. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked quietly. Ayanna nodded, her eyes wide with realization.
"It's here. It's all around us. We're getting closer. We just need to keep going." Together, they pressed on, knowing that they were on the verge of uncovering the truth.
The answers were within reach, and with every step they took, Ayanna felt the power inside her awakening, ready to be understood.
The sun had barely risen when Ayanna and the sheriff set out again.
The air was cool, a stark contrast to the heavy weight of the mystery that hung over the town.
Ayanna's mind raced with all that had been revealed to her in the past few days. The idea that her powers were part of something ancient, something tied to the very land beneath her feet, was overwhelming. She had always thought her abilities were a curse, something she needed to hide from the world. But now she was beginning to understand that her powers were part of something far bigger, something that had been waiting for her perhaps for generations. The sheriff had told her that they needed to find the source of the power, the force that had drawn her to the town.
He had hinted at old secrets buried deep within the town, secrets that the people had long forgotten or tried to bury.
They had spent the last few days searching the town, following leads that had taken them to forgotten places, old libraries, hidden cellars, and abandoned buildings. The deeper they went, the more Ayanna could feel the power stirring inside her, calling to her as if it were her destiny to uncover the truth. They reached an old crumbling church at the edge of the town, its stone walls weathered by years of neglect. The sheriff paused at the entrance, glancing at Ayanna. There was a sense of urgency in his eyes, but also something else, something like fear. This place, he had told her, was where it all began. The church had been built centuries ago, long before the town had grown into what it was now.
It was here that the original settlers had tried to seal away the ancient power, to lock it away before it could do any harm. Ayanna could feel the pull of the place before they even entered.
The air around the church felt charged, heavy with energy. It was as if the very ground beneath her feet was alive, humming with a power she couldn't fully understand. The sheriff stepped forward, leading her inside. The interior of the church was dark, the only light coming from the narrow windows that let in slivers of sunlight.
Dust motes floated in the air, creating an ethereal atmosphere. The walls were lined with old pews, their wood cracked and worn from years of neglect.
But it wasn't the pews or the old altar that caught Ayanna's attention. It was the symbol on the floor. It was faint, nearly invisible, but it was there. A circle, drawn in what looked like some kind of ancient script, a design that Ayanna could feel pulling at her from deep within.
"This is where it all started,"
the sheriff said, his voice low.
"This is where the power was sealed away, where it was contained. The settlers who founded this town knew what they were dealing with.
They knew that this place held something dangerous, something powerful, and so they created a seal, a barrier to keep it from spreading." Ayanna stepped closer to the symbol on the floor, her hand reaching out as if drawn by an unseen force. As her fingers hovered just above it, she could feel the energy of the place swirling around her, vibrating with power.
It was as though the town itself was alive, reacting to her presence. The sheriff watched her closely, his expression tense. "You can feel it, can't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
Ayanna nodded slowly.
"It's like it's calling to me," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the realization. "This power, it's part of me. It's been waiting for me." The sheriff didn't speak at first, his gaze lingering on the symbol. "I didn't know how deep this went," he admitted. "When I brought you here, I thought I could help. But now I see this is bigger than both of us. The power within you, it's been building for years. And it's not just you. It's the town, too. It's all connected."
Ayanna felt a chill run down her spine. The weight of the sheriff's words sank in, and she realized just how much was at stake.
This town, her powers...
Everything was part of a much larger story, one that she had only just begun to understand. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand reaching out to gently rest on the floor near the symbol.
"There's a way to stop it," he said. "But it's going to take everything you have. We need to break the seal, Ayanna. We need to unleash the power, but we have to do it carefully. If we don't, it will consume us." Ayanna looked up at him, fear and determination mixing in her eyes.
"How do we do it?" she asked.
The sheriff hesitated. The symbol on the floor.
"It's the key. You need to channel your power, your energy, into it. The seal was created to trap the power, to keep it from spreading. But you, Ayanna, you're the one who can break it. You're the one who can release it, but only if you're ready."
Ayanna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her. She had always tried to control her powers, always feared them, but now she realized that the only way forward was to embrace them. This power wasn't something to be feared. It was part of who she was. And if she was going to save the town, save herself, she would have to trust in it. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." With that, she knelt down, her hands reaching out to touch the symbol. As soon as her fingers made contact with the cold stone floor, a surge of energy rushed through her. The power inside her, the power she had spent so long trying to understand, flared to life. It was like a storm, a force of nature that swirled around her, filling every part of her being. She could feel the town, the land, the very earth beneath her vibrating with the energy of the seal. The sheriff stepped back, watching her closely. "Focus, Ayanna," he said, his voice urgent. "You can do this!" Ayanna closed her eyes, blocking out everything around her. She focused on the power inside her, on the energy that flowed through her, and she began to channel it into the symbol on the floor. As she did, the ground trembled beneath her, and the air grew thick with energy. The walls of the church seemed to pulse with light, the seal glowing brightly as if responding to her touch. For a moment, everything went still. And then, with a sudden burst of energy, the symbol on the floor shattered. The air around her crackled with raw power, and Ayanna felt the world shift beneath her feet.
She was no longer just a girl with a curse. She was something more, something powerful, something that could change everything.
The sheriff watched in awe as the power she had unleashed filled the room. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a force of nature that seemed to reverberate through the very core of the town. The seal had been broken, and with it the power had been set free. As the energy began to settle, Ayanna stood up slowly, her body trembling with the exertion of what she had just done. She felt different, stronger, more connected to the world around her. The town, too, seemed to have changed. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight that had hung over it for so long lifting. The sheriff walked up to her, a look of awe in his eyes. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You freed us all." Ayanna nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. She had embraced her power, and in doing so she had unlocked the truth. The curse had never been a curse at all. It had been her gift, her connection to something greater. And now the town was free, and so was she. Together, Ayanna and the sheriff walked out of the church, the morning sun shining brightly as they stepped into the world that awaited them. The town, once shrouded in mystery, now felt full of possibility. Ayanna knew that her journey wasn't over, but for the first time in her life she felt ready to face whatever came next.